Chapter 1. Under Vander's roof. The morning light did not often reach the lanes, but the day still began on time. There were sounds that told you the hour better than any clock in Piltover ever could. Pipes hissed and coughed awake behind the walls. Gulls turned in slow circles above the river, patient and hungry. Somewhere down in the market, a vendor rattled open a metal grate and set out cracked plates of fried dough, the smell of oil and salt moving through the narrow streets as if it were the first breeze in a week. In that hour, the Undercity was not yet loud. It simply existed, and that was enough for two children who had grown used to measuring safety in minutes and meals. The bar on the corner had a sign that always looked as if it had been cleaned yesterday, but hung for years. The last drop. Inside, before the doors opened, Vander wiped the counter with the slow attention that he used for everything. He had the weight of a man who remembered the cost of mistakes, and he wore that memory like an old coat, heavy but familiar. He did not boast about what he had done or who he had been. He kept the peace the way an old bridge keeps the river apart from the road. People stepped over him every day without noticing that they might have fallen. Two heads would sometimes appear on the stairs before the lanterns were fully lit. Violet first, already tall for her age, shoulders squared by habit more than size, Powder close behind, careful on the steps, a hand trailing the rail, as if the wood might guide her. Vander would pretend not to see them, and then surrender to a smile. There was work to be done, and work kept the mind from troubling itself with what could not be changed. He would pass out tasks like bread, sweep the floor, check the kegs, count the glasses. It was a ritual as binding as any oath. If your hands were busy, your thoughts would not wander into the dark. Violet learned quickly that strength was not shouting. It was the quiet decision to stand still when someone pushed you. It was taking the smaller bowl so that Powder could have enough, and then turning the choice into a joke so her sister would not notice the sacrifice. Powder learned other things. She learned where the cracked tiles were in the floor and how to step around them without making a sound. She learned to listen for the rise and fall of the room, for the moment when a laugh turned brittle, when a story about hard times gathered an edge. In those moments she would look at Vander and see his eyes move before his body did, and she would understand that peace could live inside a single glance if a man knew where to put it. The lanes were a place built from effort and repair. Pipes ran like exposed bones along the alleys, patched with plates and rope and whatever could be spared. Steam curled from vents and tasted of metal. Children mapped their worlds by the shapes of rust and the warmth of bricks under their palms. He said that Piltover liked to forget what lay beneath it. If so, the Undercity had learned to remember itself, and the memory was half pride and half bruise. People there did not ask to be admired. They asked for a fair price and a quiet night. They taught their children to move quickly and to watch the roofs for men who watched the streets. Vander did not raise the girls to be saints or soldiers. He raised them to survive together. There were rules, and he repeated them until they settled like stones at the bottom of a river. Stay close, watch out for each other, take only what you must, and never take it from one of your own. When the lanes were kind, the rules felt like old stories told to pass the time. When the lanes were cruel, the rules felt like a bridge across a gorge. There were others in that small circle around the last drop, faces that would become familiar to anyone who spent time on those streets. Milo with his easy talk and hands that never quite stayed still. Clagor, steady and watchful, a boy built like a doorframe who seemed to believe he could keep the whole world from coming through if he simply decided to stand there. They were older than Powder, younger than the world, and loyal to Violet, in the way that boys become loyal to someone who walks forward first. They looked to her and saw a way to belong that did not require shouting. She looked to them and saw a way to keep Powder from feeling alone. The Undercity breathed differently when Piltover stirred. There were hours when the topsiders poured across their bridges in polished shoes, voices bright, with plans that would never reach the lanes. Goods moved, laws moved, money moved. All of it was a tide that had learned to ignore the rock beneath it. Vander understood those tides, and he taught the children to read them, not because he wanted them to steal, but because he wanted them to be able to come home. In the evenings, the last drop became the city in miniature. Men who laid pipe and women who ran stores shared the same tables as fixers with clean cuffs and words like sand. Stories traded hands as quickly as coins. Someone always knew someone who knew a way to climb a fence, or to find an unguarded door, or to carry a small package across a busy street without being seen. Violet listened and sorted truth from bravado. Powder listened and drew the paths in her head until they became small mazes she could solve with string and pins. She would sit in the corner with a handful of scrap and make the pieces talk to each other. Sometimes they sparked, sometimes they did nothing at all. She never reminded anyone that doing nothing was still a kind of learning. Vander could not forbid hope, though he had learned to be careful with it. He did not speak about the days when the Undercity rose up and paid for it in blood and smoke. He did not curse the names of men who had once stood at his side and then gone another way. He carried those memories the way he carried the bar's key, close to the skin, the metal warmed by his hand. When Violet bristled at a slight or a rule, he would set a mug down and look at her until the room quieted inside her. You can win a fight and lose your home, his eyes said. You can win a street and lose the children who would have walked it. It is said that the lanes gave its people a double sight. They learned to see what was there and what was coming. Violet could sense when a job would turn rough, or when a guard's patience had the thinness of paper. Powder could feel when a machine was ready to be coaxed into life, or when it wanted to stay asleep just a little longer. Between them there was a promise that no one had to speak aloud. We walk in, we walk out, and we walk out together. One afternoon, when the river traffic slowed, and the market had the tired look of a day that had given all it had, the children stood on a roof and watched Piltover's towers cut the sky into orderly pieces. The sun lay along the metal rails like a coin balanced on an edge. Powder asked how far it was from their roof to the places where the streets were clean. Violet said that it was close enough to touch and far enough to bleed. Powder nodded, as if that was a measurement she understood. She took a small wind-up toy from her pocket, turned the key, and set it walking toward the edge. Violet caught it before it fell and placed it back in Powder's hand. Some things were not meant to make the whole journey. Some things only needed to prove they could start. Even then, there were signs of a different kind of dawn coming. Words moved faster than footsteps in the Undercity, and they began to collect around two names, spoken in the same breath, with equal parts caution and excitement. Jace, Victor. They were topsiders, men whispering about safe magic, about turning the unknown into a tool. Such talk would have been nothing more than gossip, if not for the way it changed the air in certain rooms in Piltover. Doors that had always been closed were being measured for new locks. If there was to be a new age, it would hang its lanterns far above the lanes, but even far light can cast a real shadow. Powder watched the older children prepare for small jobs with the devotion of a student. She packed and repacked her satchel with care that bordered on reverence. Bits of wire, a worn cloth, a little tin of screws. She loved the feel of potential, the hush of a machine that had not yet been asked to act. Violet saw this and loved her more fiercely for it. She understood that gentleness was not the opposite of courage. It was the reason for it. When she laced her boots or wrapped her hands, she was not thinking about glory. She was thinking about Powder's small palm fitting into hers across a crowded street. There were nights when the city seemed to hold its breath. The last drop would empty in a slow wave, as if the patrons were careful not to disturb the room they were leaving behind. Vander would bank the lamps and sit for a long time with his hands folded, listening to the wood settle. Violet would pretend to go to sleep and then come back down the stairs to ask one more question, always about the same thing. When do you know a line is a line and not just a mark in the dust? Vander would answer in the way he knew best, with a story about someone who had decided too late or too soon, and how both choices left scars. Powder would drift at the edge of their voices, catching the shape of the lesson without needing to hold every word. If there was a center to that small world, it was the table in the back room where plans were made. Violet learned that a plan was not a wish. It was a set of steps tied together by discipline. Who goes first? Who carries? Who watches where you run? If the street is blocked, who knocks twice? And who waits? She traced routes with a blunt pencil and listened when Clagor suggested a slower approach, or when Milo insisted a guard was lazier than he looked. She learned to leave room inside a plan for what went wrong. Powder learned that she could help without being at the front. She could make the carrying easier, make the waiting shorter, make the coming home surer. In the Undercity, trust was a currency more stable than coin. You earned it in small payments and lost it in a single bad debt. Violet paid every day. Powder paid with attention. Vander paid with the kind of promise that is never spoken aloud because speaking it would make it smaller. He would keep these children safe as long as the city let him, and if the city refused, he would try to be larger than his own shadow. So the days turned. The sisters grew in the way that children do when the world insists they grow quickly. Violet's stride lengthened. Powder's hands grew steady. The lanes taught its lessons, and the last drop held its quiet court. Above them, Piltover polished its brass and declared another week of progress. Below, the Undercity counted its meals and its mercies. Between the two, a rope stretched taut, and no one yet knew which end would be pulled first. It is said that a life looks different when you tell it from the beginning rather than from the moment it broke. In those early chapters, before the bridges filled with smoke and the streets learned new names for grief, Vi and Powder lived a simple truth that would carry them farther than they could see. They belonged to each other. It is a small truth, but small truths can survive what larger truths cannot. They fit into pockets. They sit at the bottom of cups. They wait at the top of a staircase for two sisters to come down together into the light of a bar that believed for one more day that peace could be kept by a steady hand and a door that opened on time. Chapter 2. The Spark Above. The morning of the job began like any other, though the air held the faint tension of a string drawn too tight. The lanes had not yet woken fully. The pipes hissed, the market muttered, and Vander's bar stood silent behind its shutters. Inside, 4 figures gathered around a rough table, their breath fogging faintly in the damp. Figures leaned forward, tracing a line across the map with a piece of chalk worn nearly to dust. Powder watched, eyes wide, her fingers fidgeting with the small metal trinket she had spent the night perfecting. "It sets a quick run," Vi said, her voice calm but clipped. in and out before they notice. Milo keeps the door. Clegor hauls the goods. I lead. Powder watches for the way back. It sounded simple when she said it. Most plans did, but the Undercity had its own way of twisting simplicity into something sharp. Piltover was not kind to intruders. It was polished and proud, and built to remind anyone from below that they did not belong. Vander had not been told. Vander had convinced herself that silence was a kind of mercy. He would have said no, and she needed him to believe that peace could last one more day. Some lessons were easier to apologize for than to avoid. They moved out through the narrow alleys, feet careful on the wet stone. The bridges to Piltover rose ahead, steel and brass, catching the morning light like the ribs of some sleeping giant. The guards were few at this hour, half hidden in their coats and their boredom. A shift change was the best time to vanish through the seams of the city. Powder hesitated at the foot of the bridge. The air smelled different up there, clean in a way that felt almost wrong. Bunny turned back, offering her hand. "We're together," she said simply, and that was enough. The smaller hand slid into hers, and they crossed into the city above. Piltover greeted them with silence. Streets of glass and gold rose in neat rows. Machines hummed without smoke, and the morning sun polished every surface as though even dust had no right to remain. Powder stared upward, mouth slightly open. It looked like a dream built from the pieces the Undercity never received. The building they sought stood at the end of a narrow lane lined with hanging lights. A workshop said to belong to a topsider inventor with more ambition than sense. His source had said the man hoarded rare crystals used for powering new kinds of devices. Vander might have said they were stealing trouble itself, but to Viz it was proof that she could bring something real home, something that might make their lives easier, even if only for a while. They scaled the outer wall like shadows, Clegor anchoring ropes, while Milo cursed under his breath. Powder stayed below, checking her satchel again, making sure her little bombs were secured, though none of them were meant to be thrown. They were for distraction, for light, for sound, toys meant to fool the careful. Inside, the workshop felt alive. The air hummed with faint vibration, as if the walls themselves were listening. Strange glass orbs floated in the corners, emitting a soft blue glow. Tools hung in perfect order. The group fanned out in practiced rhythm. Vi searched the shelves. Milo worked the locks. Clegor filled the sack. Powder lingered near a table where gears and copper coils nested around a crystal that pulsed like a heartbeat. She reached out, just to look closer, she told herself. Her finger brushed the surface, and the crystal sang. Light flared, brilliant and wild, flooding the room in blue fire. The hum became a roar. Alarms began to cry like wounded things.
"Powder!"
Vaisi's voice cut through the noise. "Run." They moved without thought, instincts sharpened by fear. The hallway twisted around them, full of flashing lights and mechanical shrieks. Powder stumbled, the satchel thudding against her side. Milo dragged her upright, Clegor ahead with the sack clutched to his chest. Vi covered their retreat, fists ready, heart pounding. When they burst into the open air, Piltover was awake. Guards shouted from the rooftops, rifles gleaming. The children sprinted through the lanes, dodging fountains and cables. Powder's breath came ragged, her feet slipping on the polished stone. A shot rang out, the sound sharp enough to break the morning. A pipe burst beside them, spraying steam. Vi saw the bridge ahead, their only way home. "Go," she shouted. Clegor went first, holding the sack over his shoulder. Milo followed, cursing as bullets cracked against the rail. Powder lagged behind, her smaller legs no match for panic. She turned once, as if compelled, and saw the building behind them collapse in a shuddering wave of blue light. The explosion rolled across the sky like thunder, beautiful and terrible. The bridge shook. Vander grabbed Powder and threw herself forward, the heat licking at their backs. They tumbled to the far side, coughing, the world ringing like a struck bell for a heartbeat. There was silence. Then came the echo, the Undercity's sirens, distant but growing louder. Smoke rose in columns that blurred the line between Piltover and the depths below. They had taken something, though none of them yet knew what it truly was. When they reached the last drop, the bar was empty. Vander stood at the door, eyes dark with the kind of understanding that does not need words. He said nothing as they filed in, covered in soot and guilt. Powder clung to Vidi's sleeve. Trembling, the bag hit the floor with a heavy sound, the faint blue glow leaking through the seams. Vander finally spoke. "What did you bring back?" Vi could not answer. She looked down at her hands and saw the dust of Piltover's perfect city clinging to her skin. Powder's wide eyes mirrored hers, full of wonder and dread. In the distance, beyond the smoke and the bridges, the world was already beginning to change. It is said that the moment a boundary is crossed, the air never feels the same again. The lanes had reached upward, and the cost of that touch would echo for years. For now, there were only two sisters standing side by side, caught between the light they had stolen and the shadows that waited to claim it. Chapter 3. Embers Beneath the Bridge. The explosion above lingered in the air for days. Long after the light had faded, Piltover called it an accident at first, then an act of sabotage, and finally, when the officials gathered enough courage to speak plainly, a crime. But down in the lanes, no one needed a proclamation to understand that something irreversible had happened. The smell of smoke drifted through the pipes. Water from the upper city carried a faint shimmer of ash. Even the light seemed different, sharper where it cut through the haze, duller where it fell on the streets. In the last drop, silence had taken the place of music. Vander sat behind the counter, his shoulders heavy. The others kept their distance, pretending to polish tables or check barrels that did not need checking. Milo grumbled now and then, though even his voice sounded small in the quiet. Clagger sat by the window, staring at nothing. Powder lingered near the stairs, her satchel gone, her hands restless. They stood beside Vander, waiting for words that would not come. At last, he spoke. "Do you know how close you came?" His tone was calm, almost gentle. That made it worse. Vi did not look away. "We got out. We were fine." He sighed, the sound deep and weary. "You were lucky. That sippin's not the same thing." He turned the mug in his hand, watching the light slip across the rim. A man's sip's luck runs out. Sometimes it takes others with it. "Powder sips." Small voice broke the pause. "I didn't set mean." Vander raised a hand, not in anger, but in quiet. "I know, little one." He looked at her then, the kind of look that holds both forgiveness and fear. But meaning isn't sit enough when the world starts paying attention. Outside, the Undercity muttered. News spread quickly, carried by whispers and pipe smoke. A topsider lab destroyed, enforcers swarming the bridges, rewards promised. The streets learned the story faster than it could be written. Every retelling added a shade of danger. Every glance over the shoulder, a new suspicion. And in the dark corners of the lanes, another name began to stir again, one spoken softly, with bitterness and awe. Silco. He had not been seen for years, not since Vander's uprising had drowned beneath its own ideals. But word said he had returned, breathing like a tide against the edges of the city, gathering those who had grown tired of hiding. To some, he was the ghost of rebellion. To others, the promise of something worse. Vi did not care for stories. She cared for the guilt that refused to leave her chest. Vander's disappointment burned deeper than any punishment. He did not yell. He did not forbid. He simply looked at her, as though the bridge between them had cracked, and he was unsure how to cross it. That night she found Powder sitting by the window of their room, knees pulled to her chest. The small toys she used to tinker with were gone, replaced by silence. Vi sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You did your best," she said softly. Powder nodded, though her eyes stayed on the glass. "I always do my best, but my best breaks things." Vi wanted to say something that would fix it, a word that would make the world small and safe again, but words were fragile things, and the room was already full of broken ones. She settled for wrapping an arm around her sister, letting the quiet say what she could not. In the days that followed, the Undercity changed its rhythm. Enforcers patrolled closer to the bridges, their lamps cutting harsh circles in the fog. Piltover's traders stopped sending goods downriver. Prices rose. Tempers followed. Vander spent more time in the back room, meeting with faces Vi did not know. When she asked, he told her only that he was trying to keep the peace, and that sometimes peace demanded surrender. It was not enough for her. She could feel the world tightening around them, and she hated the helplessness of waiting. The lanes had given her strength, and now that strength had nowhere to go. She trained longer, hitting the punching bag until her knuckles split. Powder watched her from the doorway, flinching with every impact. The distance between them widened in small ways, missed glances, half-answered questions, moments that used to end in laughter, but now ended in silence. One evening, Vander left for a meeting at the river docks and told the girls to stay inside. Vander waited until the sound of his boots faded, then turned to the others. Milo and Clagger were already restless. "The wall's too close for comfort. We can't just sit here," she said. "We've got to know what's happening." Milo grinned despite himself. "You mean we've got to find trouble?" Powder stepped forward. "I can help." "No," Vi said, too quickly. "Not this time." The hurt in Powder's eyes was brief but sharp. She swallowed it the way she always did, nodding without meeting her sister's gaze. When they slipped out through the back door, she stayed behind, listening until their footsteps disappeared. Then she went to her small workbench and opened the tin of screws and gears she had hidden. She could not fight like Vi, but she could make things that mattered, things that worked. Far across the lanes, the meeting did not go as Vander hoped. Silco was there, eyes gleaming with the cold patience of a man who had spent years nursing betrayal. His words were calm, his smile thin. He spoke of change, of power, of the need to rise again. Vander listened in silence, the weight of his choices pressing harder with each syllable. When he finally spoke, it was with the voice of a man who had buried too many dreams. "You talk of freedom," he said, "but all you know how to build is a grave." The river that separated them shimmered faintly with reflected lantern light. Between them, the city held its breath. When Vi returned that night, she found Powder asleep at the table, surrounded by half-finished inventions. The blue glow of one crystal toy pulsed faintly, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across her face. Vi brushed a lock of hair from her sister's forehead and whispered, "One day, they'll see what you can do." She meant it as comfort, but outside the streets carried other sounds, footsteps that did not belong, whispers gathering like storm clouds, and the first quiet creak of fate turning toward tragedy. It is said that a fire does not begin with a flame, but with the smallest spark striking the wrong surface. The explosion had passed, but the embers remained, hidden in the cracks of the lanes, and in the hearts of two sisters who loved each other enough to destroy the world without meaning to. Chapter 4. The Night of Ash and Iron. The days after Silco's return fell upon the lanes like a slow-moving storm. The air grew tense, charged with something unseen. Piltover's enforcers pressed harder, their search for the culprits of the explosion turning into an excuse for raids and beatings. People whispered that the city above was preparing to make an example, and beneath, in the dim corridors and dripping tunnels, the old loyalties began to shift again. Men who had once sworn to Vander now met in silence, waiting to see whether the old lion still had claws. Vander felt it. He carried the weight of it in his bones, in every weary step through the alleys. He saw it in the faces of those he had once protected, the disappointment, the hunger for vengeance. He had promised peace, and peace had cost them pride. Now, with Silco whispering rebellion into the dark, even that fragile balance began to tremble. The last drop no longer felt like a refuge. Vander noticed it first, the way strangers lingered too long near the door, the way the laughter at the tables had turned thin, cautious. Vander spent more time alone in the back room, the old gloves he had not worn in years lying folded beside him. Powder watched him sometimes, the way a child watches a fading star, wondering if its light would ever return. When the enforcers came for him, they came quietly. 2 officers in Piltover's grey-blue, led by a woman with sharp eyes and a coat too clean for the lanes. They did not shout or break things. They simply entered the bar, placed a folded paper on the counter, and told him he was wanted for questioning. Vander nodded. He did not resist. Peace, he had always said, was something you had to hold, even when it hurt your hands. Vi stood between him and the door before she even realized she had moved. "You still are not taking him," she said. The words shook, not from fear, but from anger, too big for her small frame. Vander's hand came down on her shoulder, steady, firm. "Vi," he said softly, "it sets all right." She looked up at him, eyes wide and desperate. "It sets not." He smiled the kind of smile that tried to remember better times. "Then I'll make it right." And before she could stop him, he let them lead him away. That night, the lanes boiled. Milo and Clagger cursed the enforcers. Powder cried until her eyes ached. Vi stood apart, fists clenched, her thoughts a storm of guilt and fury. She had brought this on them. Her decision, her need to prove something, had placed Vander in chains. When a messenger arrived hours later, speaking of his capture at the prison near the bridge, her choice was already made. "We get him back," she said. No one argued. They moved through the lanes with purpose. Milo carried tools, Clagor a map sketched on torn paper. Powder followed, though Vi had told her to stay behind. She carried her own creation, small metallic spheres lined with blue crystal, inventions meant to dazzle and confuse. She wanted to be useful. She wanted to be seen. The prison lay near the underside of the bridge, where Piltover's metal met Zaun's stone. The walls glowed faintly with runic locks, new tech designed to keep danger contained. Vi's heart pounded as they climbed the service shafts, the smell of oil and dust thick in her lungs. When they reached the vent above the holding cells, she saw Vander sitting inside, hands bound, shoulders slumped but unbroken. She whispered through the grate, "We sit here." He looked up, eyes widening. "No, you shouldn't spet be. We said getting you out." He shook his head slowly. "Vi, you don't understand. There are bigger things at play now. Go home. Keep her safe." But Vi's world had narrowed to one truth. She would not lose him. She nodded to Milo. The boy worked at the lock, muttering curses under his breath. Powder waited by the vent, clutching her bag of bombs. The air trembled with the weight of their fear and hope. Then everything changed. A hiss of steam, a scent of chemicals. Silco's men. They emerged from the shadows, like a sickness made flesh, masks glinting, eyes bright, with that eerie shimmer of shimmer, the toxin that gave strength and madness in equal measure. At their head stood Silco, calm, deliberate, his presence filling the corridor like smoke. "I wondered how long it would take before you came," he said. Vander stood, chains clattering. "Silco, don't sit, do this." Silco smiled. "Do what, old friend? Finish what you started." Vi dropped from the vent before anyone could stop her, landing hard between them. Her fists were ready, her breath steady. "Let him go." Silco regarded her with mild curiosity. The little flame, Vander's legacy. He gestured to his men. "Put it out." The corridor erupted into chaos. Milo and Clagor scrambled from the vent, shouting. Powder stayed frozen, eyes wide as the fight below unfolded in bursts of light and sound. Vander broke his chains in a surge of impossible strength. Fueled by fury and love, he threw himself into the fray, striking with the weight of a father defending what remained of his world. But Silco's men were many, and the shimmer made them relentless. Powder trembled. She looked at the bombs in her bag, at the small gleam of blue crystal through the seams. She could help. She had to help. She lit the fuse and dropped them into the fray. For a heartbeat, silence, then the explosion. The blast tore through the bridge underbelly, filling the air with heat and dust. The shockwave threw bodies and rubble alike. Vi shouted Powder's name, voice breaking. Vander staggered, coughing blood, his body between the fire and the children. Silco vanished into the smoke. When the dust cleared, the world had changed again. Milo and Clagor were gone. Vander lay wounded, his breath shallow. Powder stood a few paces away, staring at the ruin she had made. The bombs still hissed faintly where they had fallen. Vi crawled to Vander, her hands trembling. He looked at her, eyes soft, even in pain. "Take care of her," he whispered. "You spurs strong enough." Then he was gone. Vi's scream echoed through the broken bridge, a sound that cut through the smoke and carried across the river. Powder ran to her, desperate, crying, trying to explain. "I was helping. I did it for you." But Vis could not hear. The grief had turned to something sharp, something unbearable. Her hands fell away from Powder's grasp. "Stay away from me," she said. Those words, simple and final, broke what the explosion had not. Powder collapsed where she stood, tears streaking through soot. When Silco emerged from the darkness, his hand gentle on her shoulder, she did not resist. He spoke softly, his voice a knife wrapped in silk. "You are perfect," he told her. "You just need someone to see it." Vat watched. As they vanished into the smoke, she wanted to follow, to take it back, but her body would not move. The bridge groaned beneath her. The the fire below whispering like a confession. Above, Piltover's towers gleamed in ignorant light. It is said that no city falls all at once. It breaks in moments, in choices, in words that cannot be unsaid. That night, under the bridge, the lanes lost its guardian, and two sisters lost each other. The world turned, and nothing was ever quiet again. Chapter 5. The Birth of Jinx. Silco found her in the ashes, a small figure shaking in the ruins' afterglow. The fire still burned along the bridge's ribs, casting slow red pulses across the stone. Powder did not cry anymore. Her tears had dried with the heat, leaving only the salt and the tremor of a child who had seen too much. When she heard footsteps, she flinched, expecting Vade's voice or another shout from above. Instead, the sound came steady and low, the rhythm of a man who had waited years for this kind of moment. Silco knelt beside her, his hand hovering before it found her shoulder. The scent of chemicals hung faintly from his coat. "The world was cruel to you," he said softly, "but you were crueler to survive it." She looked at him through the blur of smoke and memory, the face of a stranger who spoke as though he understood. "You are not broken," he whispered. "You are unfinished." He did not take her home. Not at first. He took her away from the noise, through the tunnels and old waterways where the air was cold and wet. The river's pulse echoed around them, the same one that had once divided him from Vander. When they reached the lower depths of Zaun, he lit a small lamp and set it near her. The light flickered against her face, tracing the dried soot along her cheeks. She did not speak. She only watched the flame, as if waiting for it to turn blue. Days blurred into weeks. Powder stayed silent, her hands restless even in stillness. Silco gave her scraps of machinery, old devices scavenged from forgotten labs. She worked with them without being asked, as if her fingers moved to keep her mind from fracturing further. Sometimes she laughed quietly when something sparked or spun, a brittle, uneven sound that startled even her. Silco never stopped her. He watched with a patience that was almost reverence. It is said that grief changes shape when left in darkness. It hardens, bends, reforms into something that can be carried. Powder's grief became invention. The same imagination that once built toys to protect her sister now built weapons that sang in colors Piltover had never seen. Silco began to call her by another name, not gently, but with conviction. "Jinx," he said once, when her new creation misfired and sent a cascade of sparks across the room. She flinched, but he smiled. "A Jinx makes the world notice. That is what you are." She said nothing at first, but later, when she repeated the name to herself, it did not sound like an insult. It sounded like a mask. A mask could protect you. A mask could let you breathe again. Above, Piltover tried to contain the story. The officials spoke of rogue chem barons, of sabotage and unrest. The bridges were sealed, the trade routes strangled, but none of it stopped the whispers of a new power rising below. A man who spoke of independence, who turned the wreckage of the Undercity into a movement. Silco's influence grew quietly, like mold in damp corners. He bought loyalty where he could, and built it where he could not. His followers drank the shimmer he distributed, their veins glowing faintly violet, their eyes lit with devotion and madness alike. In his shadowed offices, Jinx learned to build without asking permission. She filled rooms with devices that ticked, hummed, and whispered. She painted walls with bright color, the kind that Piltover pretended not to see. Her laughter returned in fragments, stitched between memories of fire and Vi's final words. Sometimes, When she slept, she dreamed of the bridge. In those dreams, she always reached Vi's in time. But when she woke, the silence reminded her that dreams were only mercy disguised as cruelty. Silco became what Vander once had been, a protector, though his version of protection was built on fear. He told her stories about the lane's future, about a Zaun that would stand equal with Piltover. The city above pretends to be pure, he would say, pouring another glass of shimmer. But purity is just another word for denial. Down here, we are honest. We bleed in the open. Jinx listened and began to believe in Silco's conviction. She found a strange kind of safety. He never flinched at her mistakes. He never told her to stop building. He did not see a child who failed. He saw a weapon being born, and she, desperate to be seen, accepted the role without question. It was not long before her machines found purpose. A topside convoy was the first to fall, a silent ambush in the fog, a flash of blue light, the sound of laughter echoing after the blast. Piltover called it terrorism, the lanes called it justice, Silco called it progress, and Jinx, sitting on the roof above the smoke, whispered something only she could hear. "Sive, I can help now." Her legend grew faster than her understanding of it. Some said she was a ghost, others said she was the devil of the lanes. Children whispered her name in awe, enforcers feared it in silence. To Jinx it became a lullaby, the only song that did not hurt to remember. Silco's empire flourished beneath the city that refused to acknowledge it. New factories bloomed where homes had stood, chimneys coughing purple smoke into the air. The river turned darker, heavier, yet in the heart of that corrosion, the people of Zaun began to believe they might one day stand on their own. Silco spoke of unity, of strength, of revenge, dressed as freedom, and beside him, Jinx smiled, her hands stained with grease and paint, her heart split cleanly between worship and the ghost of her sister. Sometimes, when she walked the quiet tunnels, she would hear echoes, footsteps behind her that were never there, whispers that sounded like her own name spoken in Vi's voice. She would turn, gun raised, breath held, and find nothing but air. Those were the moments that frightened her most. Not the blood, not the fire, but the silence that followed when she realized that somewhere deep inside, a part of powder still called out for home. It is said that the strongest walls are not built of stone or steel, but of conviction. Silco gave her that conviction. He shaped her, named her, armored her against the world. And yet, beneath the paint and laughter, beneath the fire and invention, there remained a single fault line, a memory of a sister's hand reaching back across the smoke. It waited, buried but unforgotten, for the day the two halves of one heart would face each other again. Chapter 6. The Cage of Stone and Silence. The bridge had fallen quiet, but the city above did not rest. Piltover rebuilt its walls and sealed its records, calling the incident an act of undercity aggression. The names of the dead were spoken in mourning halls, and the name of the one responsible was whispered behind closed doors. Vi was caught before the dust had settled. To the enforcers, she was not a girl who had lost everything. She was the symbol of everything they feared, and so they took her, bound her, and dragged her into the cold heart of Piltover's justice. The prison was carved deep into the cliffside, a place built not to reform but to forget. Its corridors were long, narrow, and echoing, lit by dim lamps that burned with sterile blue light. The air smelled of metal and damp stone. Vi learned quickly that silence could be as heavy as chains. The guards spoke little, their faces hidden behind brass masks that reflected nothing. Time dissolved into repetition, the the sound of boots on stone, the clang of gates, the slow descent into routine. At first she fought. Her anger was a living thing, clawing at the walls, demanding to be heard. She shouted until her voice broke, kicked until her legs ached, punched until her knuckles split. But stone does not bleed, and metal does not pity. In time her strength turned inward. She stopped speaking, stopped counting the days. The fire in her chest did not die. It simply cooled, compressed into something sharper. In the long hours between lights out and morning, she dreamed of powder. In those dreams, her sister was still small, still reaching for her hand. The dreams always ended the same way, with fire, with smoke, with silence. When she woke, she would stare at her hands, wondering if they could ever be clean again. Outside her cell, the world changed without her. Piltover continued to polish its image of progress. Hextech spread through the city like a promise made of light. The discovery that Jace and Victor had begun now powered street lamps, airships, and weapons alike. People spoke of a golden age, unaware that beneath their shining towers, a shadow grew thicker. Silco's empire thrived in the absence of opposition. With Vander gone and Viken imprisoned, Zaun's heart beat to his rhythm. He moved carefully, weaving alliances through trade, intimidation, and poison. Shimmer flowed through the veins of the Undercity like a second river, glittering and deadly. And at his side stood Jinx, no longer the trembling child by the bridge, but a phantom draped in blue fire. Her laughter echoed through the alleys before her bullets ever did. To some, she was the Undercity's guardian angel. To others, its curse. In prison, Vi heard fragments of her legend through whispers between guards. They spoke of a girl with hair, the color of smoke, of explosions that painted the sky in violet and gold. They did not know her name, but Vi did. The knowledge cut deep. Powder was alive, but the world now called her Jinx. The first time she heard that name aloud, she struck the wall so hard the stone cracked. The guard said nothing. The silence afterward was worse than any insult. She pressed her forehead to the cold rock and whispered, "I sup and coming, Powder, just hold on." Years passed. The seasons in Piltover were measured not by warmth or cold, but by the rhythm of invention. New devices, new laws, new fears. Vi marked them only by the scars on her hands. Every blow she landed on the training dummy the guards had left her was a promise that she would not let the story end here. There were others in the prison who had been forgotten, smugglers, debtors, rebels from the old days. Some whispered about a man named Silco and his growing influence. Others spoke of new weapons that could level bridges in seconds. Vi listened and said nothing. She learned to wait, to observe, to let the fire breathe through cracks instead of burning itself out. Then, one day, the rhythm changed. The sound of boots outside her cell was different, lighter, deliberate. The lock turned, and the door opened. A woman stood there in Piltover armor, her expression calm but curious. "Violet," she said, "you've been hard to find." Vi squinted against the light. "Who are you?" "Caitlin Kiramin," the woman replied, "and if what I heard is true, we might be able to help each other." The air shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. For the first time in years, Vi stepped beyond the cell door. The hallway stretched ahead, like a tunnel leading back toward life, uncertain, dangerous, and bright. She looked once over her shoulder at the empty space she was leaving behind, then followed the sound of Caitlin's footsteps into the unknown. It is said that captivity changes a person in two ways. It can either break them or temper them. Will left her cell, neither broken nor free, but sharpened, forged in silence, ready to face the ghosts that still waited beneath the city she once called home. Chapter 7. The Shattered Mirror. The streets of Zaun had changed. When Vi returned, they were louder, stranger, hungrier. The air pulsed with color, neon blues and greens that burned against the mist. Shimmer was everywhere now, running through pipes, through people, through the veins of the city itself. The old corners of the lanes were unrecognizable. Children she once knew were gone, or grown into ghosts. The last drop stood, but it no longer felt like home. Its walls bore new symbols, its tables new faces. Vander's memory had faded into rumor. Caitlin moved carefully beside her, her Piltover attire drawing too much attention. Vista's jaw tightened each time someone stared. "You said sure about this?" Caitlin asked quietly. Vista nodded. "I have to find her." Finding Jinx was not like chasing a person. It was like chasing a storm. You could follow the destruction, but never predict where it would land. Explosions marked her trail, workshops reduced to ash, rooftops painted with graffiti of manic color, laughter echoing where no one stood. To Piltover, she was chaos incarnate. To Zaun, she was legend. To Vi, she was still powder. Their first encounter came without warning. The two were following a lead through the lower docks when the night lit up with a familiar blue flare. Vors froze. "That's her." Before Caitlin could answer, Vors running. The explosion's heart was a factory, gutted from within. Smoke poured from shattered vents. At its center stood Jinx, silhouetted against the firelight, her braided hair swaying like twin shadows. She turned slowly, and for a moment, the years vanished. Powder looked back at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Then the grin returned. Bright, wild, wrong. "Hi, sis." Vi stepped forward, her voice breaking. Jinx tilted her head. "No, no, you don't get to call me that. Powder died on the bridge. You left her there." Her tone danced between playfulness and pain. "But don't worry. I fixed what you broke." She raised her weapon, the monstrous cannon she called Fishbones, and the ground shook beneath its weight. "Powder," Vidi said again. Softer. "I never stopped looking for you." For a heartbeat, Jinx's expression flickered, the smile faltered, and her eyes darted. Confusion, hope, fear, all colliding. You're lying. You're always lying." The cannon twitched upward, her finger tightening on the trigger. Caitlin moved, weapon raised, but voice calm. "We said not here to hurt you." The moment snapped. Jinx laughed, a high, sharp sound that filled the air with madness. "You Piltover people always say that before you pull the trigger." She fired. The blast tore through the room. Viti grabbed Caitlin, diving behind a collapsed beam. Debris rained down. When the ringing in her ears faded, Jinx was gone, her laughter still echoing through the smoke. Later, in the dim refuge of an abandoned workshop, Caitlin cleaned a cut on Vist's arm. "That wasn't Set, just an enemy," she said. Vist stared at the wall, jaw set. "No, that was my sister." In the following days, Vi tried to follow Jinx's movements, old haunts, graffiti messages, coded signals, left in the tunnels. Each clue felt like a conversation half finished. Sometimes she found small devices left behind, spinning toys, painted bullets, notes that read, "Miss me," or "You should have stayed gone." She kept them all, as if collecting them might bring her closer. Meanwhile, the balance between Piltover and Zaun began to fray. Hextech weapons were stolen from guarded vaults. Counselors whispered of war. Silco's control weakened under Jinx's volatility. She no longer answered to anyone, not even him. His empire trembled, and Vi knew the end was coming. "If I don't reach her first," she told Caitlin, "no one will." The second meeting was quieter. A warehouse by the river, half drowned in fog. Vi entered alone, her heart pounding in her throat. Jinx sat on a table, legs swinging, a match in her hand. "You came back," she said. "Thought you said be smarter than that." "I came to take you home." Jinx laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Home? There is no home, just Piltover sets, lies, and sunset's dust." She struck the match and watched the flame curl. "You don't set understand, Vice. I is set what it's left when hope burns out." Vi took a step forward. "You stare still, my sister." The flame trembled. For a moment, the world held its breath. Jinx's eyes softened, her voice almost a whisper. "Then why does it hurt when you say that?" Vi didn't yet answer. She reached out, and for the first time in years, Jinx didn't pull away. Their hands hovered close enough to feel the warmth. Then footsteps sounded outside. Enforcers shouting orders. The spell broke. Jinx, its eyes widened in panic. "You brought them." "No." Vita reached for her, but Jinx was already moving, already gone into the smoke. The door burst open, light flooding the room. By the time Vi shoved the enforcers back, the only thing left of her sister was the faint echo of laughter and the flicker of a dying match. It is said that reunion is not always healing. Sometimes it is a reminder of what was lost, a mirror cracked too deeply to reflect what once was whole. Vi and Jinx had found each other again, but not as sisters, as symbols on opposite sides of a war. Neither had chosen, and yet, beneath the pain and chaos, the bond remained, invisible and unbroken, waiting for a moment when the world would fall silent enough for them to hear it again. Chapter 8. The Last Light of Zaun. Zaun was burning again, but this time the fire did not come from Piltover's cannons. It came from within, from betrayal, from grief, from the slow unraveling of everything Silco had built. His empire had grown vast, but its foundations were fear and addiction, and those cannot stand forever. Rumors spread through the lanes like fever, factories shutting down, shipments intercepted, lieutenants turning on one another, and in the center of it all stood Jinx, untethered and radiant in her ruin. Silco watched the city from his office window, the river below thick with shimmer's glow. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered, the scar across his face deeper, his eyes dimmer. He had dreamed of freedom for Zaun his whole life, but now even victory tasted like ash. He poured a glass of something dark and let it sit untouched. When he spoke, it was to the empty air. "You wanted peace, Vander. I wanted power. Maybe we were both fools." Behind him, footsteps approached. Jinx entered without knocking, her movements restless, a gun swinging lazily at her side. "They stare talking about you again," she said, "saying you sev gone soft, that you said losing your grip." Silco turned, studying her. "And what do you think?" She smiled, the kind of smile that hides a wound. "I think they said all afraid of me now." He almost smiled back. "That was never the goal." "Then maybe your goal was too small." There was no venom in her voice, only truth. She had outgrown even his control. Silco saw it now. The chaos he had nurtured was no longer a tool. It was a force, and in her eyes, he saw something he both feared and admired: absolute conviction. She was free in a way he had never been. Outside, Piltover's council debated their next move. Caitlyn's report spoke of Silco's weapon shipments, of Hextech thefts, of Zaun's swelling unrest. Jace, once the idealist, now spoke with the tone of a man cornered by his own invention. "We end it now," he said. "One strike, no more bridges left to burn." Meanwhile, Vi searched the city for Jinx, desperate to reach her before Piltover's armies did. Every contact she met spoke in riddles, afraid to say her name. "She sets everywhere," one whispered, "and nowhere. She listens through the wires now." The final meeting came not by plan, but by inevitability. Jinx had taken Caitlyn. She wanted proof, proof of loyalty, proof of love, proof that Vi had not replaced her. The scene unfolded in Silco's old office, the city outside trembling under the weight of sirens and smoke. Vi entered with hands raised, her voice steady though her heart raced. "Powder, please. You don't have to do this." Jinx's finger traced the trigger of her pistol. Her eyes darted between Viri, Caitlyn, and Silco. "Don't sit call me that," she said. "You don't sit get to call me that after everything." Her voice cracked. "You chose them. You left me." Vi stepped closer, her hand trembling. "I never stopped being your sister." Jinx's face softened for a breath, and in that fragile silence, Silco spoke from the shadows. "She sits telling the truth. Girl, you have already won. You don't sit need to prove anything." "Shut up!" Jinx turned on him, tears glittering in her eyes. "You said she sits never understand." "I was wrong," Silco said. His tone was low, weary. "She sits the only one who might." The moment broke like glass. The gun went off. The shot echoed. Silco staggered, confusion in his eyes, then fell into Jinx's arms. The look he gave her was not anger, but something far worse. "Forgiveness. Don't cry," he whispered. "You're perfect." And then he was gone. The world seemed to stop. Jinx stared at her hands, at the smoke rising from the pistol. Vi stepped forward, whispering her name, but Jinx was already somewhere else. Somewhere between grief and madness, between love and hate. She laughed, softly at first, then louder, until it sounded like sobbing. Above, Piltover's council gathered for what they believed would be peace. Jace spoke of unity, of the future. The others nodded, unaware of the shadow streaking toward them from below. Jinx stood atop the highest tower of Zaun, the Hextech rocket glinting blue beside her. The wind whipped through her braids as she lit the fuse. She whispered into the night, voice trembling, "This is for us." The rocket screamed upward, a line of light across the sky. In the council chamber, the window filled with blue flame. It is said that history remembers the grand designs, not the broken hearts that forged them. Piltover called it an act of terror. Zaun called it vengeance. Vengeance called it loss. And somewhere, deep beneath the city, in the glow of fading firelight, two sisters remained bound by love, strong enough to destroy the world and tender enough to mourn what it had cost. The war between progress and pain would go on, but the story of Vi and Jinx, of Violet and Powder, would linger like smoke in the streets of Zaun, where every echo still carried their names.